Welcome to the Maximize Business Value Podcast. This podcast is brought to you by Mastery Partners, where our mission is to equip business owners to maximize business value so they can transition their business on their terms. Our mission was born from the lessons we've learned from over 100 business transactions, which fuels our desire to share our experiences and wisdom so you can succeed. Now here's your host, CEO of Mastery Partners, Tom Bronson.
Hi, this is Tom Bronson, and welcome to Maximize Business Value, a podcast for business leaders who are passionate about building long-term sustainable value in their businesses. For this episode, I'd like to welcome our guest to the podcast, Mark Mitford, who is principal at HR Catalyst Consulting. Mark and I have been friends for over 20 years, I think, somewhere around 20 years.
Been a while.
And we've worked together at some of my businesses. In addition, Mark is a partner here with us at Mastery Partners. Welcome to Maximize Business Value. Mark, how are you today?
Great. Thanks, Tom. Appreciate it. I'm doing great. How about yourself?
I'm doing great. You know, locked and loaded. Happy to be in such a wonderful place, you know, during this shelter-in-place order. So tell us about HR Consulting, HR Catalyst Consulting.
Yeah, we could just go with HR Catalyst too, Tom. So it's kind of funny, and I'll get into it a little bit as we get into our conversation. But yeah, so what HR Catalyst does, we're really focused on helping small to middle market size clients really create and then drive a people strategy within their business. So that's in essence why we exist. And we define, so I'll just add some clarifiers there. So companies typically between about 20 employees up to about 300 employees, and also from a revenue perspective, companies maybe that are around 3 million in revenue to about 75 million in revenue are somewhat kind of our ideal or target client that we kind of we find we can really work with and really partner with well.
Got it. So how long have you been with HR Catalyst?
Started the company in October 2013. So very blessed to have it up and running now. We're in year 7 of kind of a fun journey. So
what were you doing before you started HR Catalyst?
Yeah, before I was a corporate HR person. So I've actually been March of this year, March of 2020, I've been in Dallas, the DFW area for 30 years. Wow. And corporate HR person, started off with bigger companies. A few of the flagship names would be Ericsson, Nortel, Texas Instruments, PepsiCo.
Wow.
And
impressive list.
Yeah, and then it's kind of a good list. Really, even with some of those, I was very fortunate that with Ericsson, I was overseas about 30% of the time. So somewhat travel the globe doing leadership development and leadership coaching for Ericsson globally. And my last few years, prior to starting HR Catalyst, I actually moved into the middle market world. So I worked with 3 middle market sized companies. 2 of those were private equity backed and 1 was an S Corp. And with those companies, they were anywhere from about 120 employees to 1,500 employees. And I was their head of HR, directly reporting to either the business owner or the CEO of the company.
Wow. So as I think about that, is a wide variety of your experience. Do businesses of kind of all sizes, because you've worked in small businesses and the largest of big businesses, are the HR challenges the same?
Yeah, it's a great question. They are. What you find is the biggest issues that I find are that a lot of times it's just the pure scale. So it's just the scale and the magnitude. And even Ericsson, when I was there in the early 90s, Ericsson had offices in 45 countries or so. PepsiCo, a global brand, obviously everybody knows very well. So when you look at it, a lot of times the scale and complexity and then the legal side of HR is very different country to country. But when it comes down to it, it's fascinating because what I try to do, a lot of the blueprint of what good HR is and how a company has a well-run HR organization and a good culture is very similar, but what we do is we simplify it and dilute it down a little bit for some of the clients that we actively work with, because they have 20 employees or they have 100 employees. And so then the scale and the magnitude of the complexity is just comparable to scaling it for that size organization versus a PepsiCo, if you will.
Interesting. For those of you listening who've never heard of Ericsson, they used to make cell phones.
Yes, they did.
Do they even exist anymore? I don't even know.
Yeah, Ericsson's doing well. They actually have their U.S. headquarters are in Plano.
Oh, no kidding.
Yeah, so they exist very well. Nortel unfortunately went.
Yes, Nortel.
Yeah,
Right.
Nortel. I was there through the good times of Nortel, and unfortunately the times where they were unraveling, and they went. For those in the financial world, they went through BK or they went through bankrupt, and then they sliced and diced Nortel. So you still see Nortel products, and Nortel products like Cisco products or things like that.
Yeah.
So you still see a lot of Nortel brands or even Nortel business phones, but unfortunately they no longer exist as a business. They no longer exist as a business entity because it went bankrupt. Probably the 2003, 2005 is when they sliced and diced the company and sold it off.
Perhaps if we were doing a podcast back in the day, Nortel would have benefited from how to maximize business value.
They very much would have, Tom. They needed you in spades.
Back in the wish I'd been
back in the day.
Well, I was doing it for myself. So as I think about the role of kind of HR in maximizing business value, I think that if I polled most business owners, they would agree intuitively that their biggest asset is their people, right? I mean, how many times when you ask that question do you get that as the answer? And while human capital, I think if you think about most businesses, at least, human capital is probably the largest expense for most businesses. Why don't more business owners focus on maximizing their human capital as an asset?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. It's fascinating because, and just to put some numbers to it, I would say then again, these are not, they vary by industry, but roughly when you look at, and when you're looking at people cost, let's say the rough math on it is about between 50 to 75% of any organization, and again, any organization, regardless of industry, is going to be your people cost.
How much is that?
About 50 to 75%.
Wow. Yeah. Okay.
So, the upper end is going to be a professional services or consulting firm because they have very, highly educated people who are probably going to be making $75,000 and above. On the flip side, when you get down into more of that 50% range, then you're probably looking at maybe more of a blue collar manufacturing type of environment. I do work with a lot of construction businesses now. And so they have people maybe that are making $12, $15, $18 an hour. But when you look at payroll, when you look at your people cost, you can't forget about these huge costs around your benefits. Benefits, 401k, 401k matching programs, your vacation, all of the costs. When you're looking at your overall people cost, you've got to bake in a fully loaded cost, which includes a lot of other areas simply besides your payroll. So make sure that business owners, when they think about it, they really need to think about an all-in cost. Kind of going back to your question, though, it's kind of fascinating because most business owners, when they start their business, they have a product, they have an idea, they have a product. They probably were good in operations or maybe good at selling things. So when it comes down to it, I think it's, again, I'm a kind of a simple-minded guy when it comes down to it, but I think it really comes down to they understand either the operations side really well in creating efficiency, they understand the product side, or they understand, they love to, just like yourself, Tom, you love to sell. You're kind of a consummate salesperson. That's kind of where you grew up in your career. So I think people just go to what they're comfortable with. And when they're starting out, they really, they know they're going to have people within their organization. But at the end of the day, they really, as it's simple to take care of your people, and the people stuff is simple when it's maybe an organization under 10 people. But as business owners grow their company, they become successful. Let's say they go from 10 to 50 employees. then what they find is the people stuff, they understand it a little bit, but they know they've got to pay people, they've got to offer maybe some level of benefits, but they really are starting to get out of their comfort zone. And unfortunately, it almost becomes, I'll just let somebody in the office worry about the people stuff. And they really don't find that as a strategic differentiator in their business. They really think the strategic differentiators in their business are really focused around their product, their sales processes, and things that are really focused around sales and operations versus the people stuff. And so a lot of times the people side or human capital side is almost like the redheaded stepchild in the business.
Interesting. As I was thinking about the progression of growth that you're talking about, a lot of times what I've seen in businesses are, as those businesses continue to grow and thrive and become successful, they've taken somebody out of AP or an accounting,
Mhm.
or the assistant to the president, and that becomes the de facto HR person. Why? Because they're doing payroll, right? I mean, and so
Right.
payroll is an essential part of HR. But a lot of small businesses kind of think of payroll as being HR, but it's way more complex than that. And as the business grows, if you don't have kind of the right leadership in place in that HR, then there are probably some things that business owners are not thinking about doing that they should be thinking about, because their mindset is still where they started, and they're at least solving the problem. It's not flaring up on them, right? So,
Right.
so, so what are some ways that business owners can kind of make a meaningful impact on the value of their businesses in HR?
Yeah, I'd say, I'll probably just give you a couple just off the top of my head. I'd say one of the key things, and it's fascinating, quite a few of the clients we work with, irregardless if it's a company that's been in existence for 5 years or sometimes even 50 years. Now we do work with companies that are a little bit past startup, but we also work with companies. We've worked ironically with several companies that are second generation owners. And quite often, what they have not, one of the key things that we can help them with, because they really haven't done a good job of defining their culture within their organization. So when I think about culture, it's really made up by a couple of components. It's really made up by either their vision, their mission or purpose statement, really focused on why we exist as a business, and their set of core values. So when I think about those items, it really comes down to when you think about mission or purpose, it really is much more about why do you exist. I think the classic example here is, an example that's used very often is somebody who's a bricklayer. If they're laying bricks, and they may say, well, one person, they ask three people, I lay bricks. Well, that's what I do for my job. This other person who's a bricklayer, they say, well, what do you do to make a living? Well, I'm building a wall. So they may get past, I lay bricks and now I build a wall. And this other person comes back and they say, you know what, I'm helping to build this beautiful cathedral.
Wow.
And they're building this beautiful cathedral, this wonderful, maybe it's an art museum. I'm helping to build this art museum. And the bricks, you got to start it here, but I'm thinking much more visionary. So I think a lot of times business owners, they don't even think about one of the biggest problems we find is that even a company that's 40, 50 years old, they really haven't done a good job of defining their culture.
Yeah.
And when you think about it too, we typically start out with a needs assessment, and we ask that question of different people within the organization, describe your culture. And it's fascinating and somewhat a little bit scary to hear the commentary we get back on that simple question.
So I agree with you. I think culture is huge, and a lot of times many businesses think of culture as being kind of event driven, or something like that. How would you kind of define corporate culture? Not a good or a bad one, but what it would be your definition of corporate culture?
Yeah, I'd say the simplest definition that I love to use is it's basically the written and the unwritten rules that actually get things done in the organization.
No kidding.
Or it's almost like kind of like the ethos of the company. How do you get things done operationally, financially, from a sales perspective in the organization? And some of those things are very process driven and they're written, and other things are naturally unwritten, but they just happen very naturally in an organization. And that really helps to define what an organization's culture is.
And so even if the culture is a dumpster fire, it's still a culture, right?
It is. And so you get the classic thing we love to work with leaders with and business owners too is you have, and we've done several newsletters on this also, but you have a culture whether you have a culture whether or not this is going to be leadership driven, employee driven, or crisis driven. Every company has a culture, but quite often the culture actually is much more of a negative and a detractor than it is a something that a company can use to its strategic advantage.
Wow, that is so true. When I always say, of course, as you know, and our listeners know, I've done 100 transactions, so I've sat in the CEO seat more than once, and I always said that my most important job as the CEO was the keeper of the corporate culture.
Sure.
And hey, I failed many times doing that. I can point back. In fact, that's probably one of the reasons why I brought you into one of our organizations a while back. I had a tragic culture that needed some help. But that is to me something that the CEO needs to focus on. You do a way bigger deep dive into HR stuff than we do at Mastery. But I do love to ask the question of CEOs when I get that 1 hour sit down with them for a consultation, and I say, so tell me, can you articulate your corporate values? Can you tell me your values? Oh yeah, we can do that. Yeah. Well, what are they? And then they typically will stumble through them a little bit, and then I'll ask just a simple question. If I walk out of your office right now and go ask 5 people what our corporate values are, would they all give me the same answer? And the CEOs that really get it are going, yeah, probably not. But
Right.
the ones who say, oh yeah, they all get it, and they were stumbling through it themselves. Boy, that's a real challenge and an opportunity. So,
Right.
so as I think about things that you can do in HR, there are a lot of things that you can do in HR that cost a lot of money, right? I mean,
Mhm.
health insurance is expensive. You've
Mhm.
got other benefits, 401k matches. Does speaking of culture and how that kind of plays
Mhm.
into HR, does it always need to cost a pile of money to invest in your people?
No, it really doesn't. I think, it doesn't need to cost a lot of money to do that, Tom. I think, when you look at it too, that a smaller organization, I don't know, let's say an organization that's 25 people, maybe 10 to 25 people, you could have a team happy hour. You could do something like that where you have a team happy hour, or maybe monthly when the weather's nice. You could just get a couple of people who love to cook and grill. You could do have grill hot dogs and hamburgers in the parking lot, and maybe the CEO spends $100 and getting a couple of bottles of wine and maybe a couple of cases of beer, and do that on a Friday afternoon and shut down at 3 o'clock. So that's something you do, and another great thing which I highly recommend too is whenever you recognize something that's good happening. So a lot of times too, if a company does have a strong set of core values, and this person does something for you which really epitomizes one of the core values. I'm a big fan of having managers or leaders within the organization. You could even just go to Dollar Tree or Half Price Books or wherever and pick up a handful of just basic thank you notes. That'll probably cost you, for 25 thank you notes would probably cost you $3.
Yeah.
And just do a hand, instead of sending them an email, write them a handwritten note to say thank you. And thank you so much for doing this. This really epitomizes this core value. Maybe it's going the extra mile. Maybe it's something about doing the right thing. And that, that a lot of times, because I read, a lot of people are out there that are probably going to listen to this. They read the book, GE, which is one of those iconic CEOs back in the 70s and 80s, Jack Welch. He would write hundreds of these thank you notes himself.
Wow.
Every week. And you just think about it. If you had a handwritten note from Jack Welch, when you had your company that you ran that had over 200 people, if you had a handwritten note from Tom, that would just go a long way. And that cost you 5 minutes to write, and it probably cost you 10 cents to have a thank you note. So you think about, you don't have to spend a lot of money to do things that are very impactful.
That's a great idea. A lot of times people might think, I've done that myself in the past, and people might think, well, what am I going to write? Promise you, if you just write one sentence, 3 or 4 more will follow, and it takes you 5 minutes. So let's take a quick break. We'll be back in 30 seconds.
Mastery Partners equips business owners to maximize business value so they can transition on their own terms using our 4-step process. We start with a snapshot of where your business is today. Then, we help you understand where you want to be and design a custom strategy to get you there. Next, you execute that strategy with the help of our amazing resource network. And ultimately, we help you transition your business on your terms. What are you waiting for? More time? More revenue? If you want to maximize your business value, it takes time. Now is the time. Get started today by checking us out at masterypartners.com or email us at info@masterypartners.com to learn more.
And we're back with Mark Mitford with HR Catalyst. We've been talking about things that you can do in your business to really maximize that asset, the biggest asset that you probably have, which is your people. So, Mark, let's switch gears a little bit. In my experience, because I've done a lot of M&A work, mergers and acquisitions, and in my experience, HR is one of the most overlooked areas of due diligence. So what are some areas of HR that should be explored if a company is buying another company or if they're being acquired by another company? What do you think are the things that should be looked at?
Right. Yeah. No. Great. That's a great question too, Tom. So it's, I think one of the key things, and we kind of talked about it a couple of minutes ago, but it's really focused on culture, because quite often, and the statistics, and I'm sure a lot of your listeners know the statistics, but about 80% of acquisitions fail.
Yes.
So whether they're mergers or acquisitions, 80% fail for some reason, whether it's financially, whether it's whether you don't there's issues with product mix and products migrating together, technology issues. But I think one of the common denominators, again, which is very much overlooked, is there a good corporate culture fit between one company, between the two companies? And like you said, quite often that they do not have. I've been very fortunate that I have been brought in sometimes to do an HR due diligence on a company or help a company also do post-acquisition integration. And they're both critical. So one of the key things on the most strategic side is whether or not there's a good cultural fit. Another key thing also would be around, what does the leadership talent look like within the two organizations? Is there going to be a good merger of the leaders and a good consolidation and integration of leaders within the organization? And if so, what would that plan look like if that deal actually crosses the finish line? Because as you know, quite a few deals that go into diligence actually never cross the finish line.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
And I was part of one.
Than most realize, many more than most realize.
Right.
So if you're doing, so I think a lot of times, correct me if I'm wrong, folks like you and businesses like yours, HR Catalyst, get called in post-acquisition when there was no pre-acquisition HR diligence done.
Yeah, and it's a mess. It's just like it's a dumpster dive, because it's a mess, and quite often you're brought into, and it's one of the key things we try to do too with our clients also is we try to be more proactive around HR and human capital, and the same here versus reactive. And a lot of times HR becomes a very reactive thing. On the worst case is if you have a governmental audit, or if you have an employee who sues you for wrongful termination. Those are things which are totally reactionary, and a lot of times, 99% of those times, if that was handled in a more proactive fashion on the front end, the liability exposure could have been greatly minimized. And that liability exposure all quite often ends up with a massive settlement, a lot of dollars that have to go out the door to make this go away. On the flip side too, with on post acquisition, a lot of times again we're brought in to fix things which were never thought about during due diligence and might have been easily sorted out during due diligence. And maybe that could have been one of those things that could have perhaps affected the business value. And so possibly the company that was looking at acquiring a target company could have actually gotten a better price for the organization because they may have some liability exposure there. They may have some issues within their leadership team that are very toxic that need to be solved very quickly after the deal is consummated and actually crosses the finish line. So those are the types of things we can help companies, and quite often for a minimal cost of using us on the due diligence side, we could save a lot of money once the deal has actually crossed the finish line and doing a lot of cleanup and triage, which may have been able to be solved on the front end.
Yeah, as you know, of course, I've done so many transactions. Most of my transactions, I was on the buyer side and doing HR due diligence. Look, due diligence is designed to find the problems, right? But it doesn't always mean that it's going to fall apart. But I always felt like it was better to understand what I'm walking into, right? So that post acquisition integration could go smoother. And hey, we weren't successful 100% of the times with those either. I mean, we had some very toxic situations come up that we weren't able to uncover. But if you go into an acquisition having done full due diligence, which includes HR, then you've got a much better opportunity to develop a strategy to be successful kind of on the backside. So that's great advice. So Mark, as we're recording this, just to give folks a time stamp here, it's being recorded during the COVID-19 outbreak. In a lot of places you've got folks that are shelter in place. It's not universal, but it's all over the country right now. If I was to nail you down on what are the top 2 or 3 things a business owner should be doing to protect their most valuable asset during a turbulent time like this, what would you say those things are?
Yeah, and I don't want to sound like a broken record, so you don't. Hopefully, as you kind of look at this, but I would say the key thing is it goes back to culture, and it really goes back to culture. And folks love to work on their culture and focus on their culture. Sometimes business owners, unfortunately, think it's something that's kind of warm and fuzzy. But culture is a strong company culture is what you lean on during the good times and also the bad times. So I think in times like we're going through and where there's a huge amount of information out there around leadership and crisis. I'd say one of the key things that leaders need to focus on now is why do we exist as a company? So really their mission or purpose and their core values, to really start focusing on those to make sure, and this is a great time to actually further reinforce and entrench your culture. And the other thing, if companies unfortunately have to go through any workforce changes, and whether it's furloughing employees or job reduction, I was on the phone call this morning with the CEO, and he's going to be looking at doing a number of things. But it's also a time, if you have any dead weight in your organization or poor performers in your organization, this may be a really good time to allow those people to look for other opportunities. Oh. And you hate to paint it that way, but also there's also great unemployment benefits right now that are part of the stimulus package. So even though you may let somebody go, which is challenging, this is a really good time to look at maybe letting go of some poor performers who are in that lower 10%, and every organization has a lower 10% of their organization. They can always either try to coach up or out. And then the last thing to do is think about this as a transformational opportunity. Are there things that are happening right now that could actually be ways, are there ways you can work that are going to be transformational for your business that could actually, so it'll help you come out of this crisis much stronger than you are today?
Oh, that's a great way to think about it. That's there. Even you and I have talked about in our own businesses. Now that we're doing so many things electronically, it's made us that much more efficient, right?
Right,
Of
sure.
course, I always visit with my clients this way, using video conferencing and things like that. But now I'm actually doing business development and other things this way. Boy, I'm buying back all kinds of time to think more strategically. It occurred to me, I hadn't even really thought about that whole, this is a good time to offload somebody that's dead weight or needs to go. It's hard for a CEO to do that because most CEOs think it's their own failure if they have to offload somebody, and it's really not. I heard some great advice recently, and I can't even quote the source because I don't know where it came from. But the question was, when should a CEO fire somebody in their organization? And the answer, of course, is the first time they think about it.
Right.
Because by the time, guilty in my own business, right? When I let those decisions linger for a long time, it does more long-term damage to the culture of the organization than it does to go ahead and rip that Band-Aid off. So during this time and during other times, what are some things that HR Catalyst can do for your clients, and what sets HR Catalyst apart from all the other fractional HR people out there?
Yeah, I think, well, you're kind of a two-part question. So the first question I would say would be, so what can HR Catalyst do for for an organization? So again, we will start as strategic as well. One of the beauty, I guess I'll start even there. One of the key things we do, and I mentioned it earlier, but it's around, with larger clients we're going to be working with on a longer term or retained basis, we will always do a needs assessment, kind of a low-cost needs assessment, because the key thing we want to make sure is that we're not coming in as consultants and telling you this is how your company is screwed up. Because we've been around, we've done this for 30 years, I know everything about HR, because I don't. So one of the key things we do right up front is we will do a very intense day-long needs assessment. And so what we try to do with every client is we come back with a customized set of recommendations on where the organization has problems. And those aren't our recommendations. Those are recommendations that the leadership team tells us are things that are good, bad, or ugly.
Got it.
If they're good, great. But if they're ugly, we will consolidate those, make those confidential, and then we will report back to the CEO or their inner circle and the CEO and say, here's what we heard is screwed up in your company, and here's how we can help you. So that's one of the key things we try to do to differentiate ourselves. A couple of things when you productize what we do, let's say, we will help a company formally look at creating a good culture, setting the vision, mission, core values. We will do that. A lot of times we do that quite often with our clients. I'm working with a client, actually the two of us share right now, that you were gracious enough to share with me, and that's great to work with her. But we're starting out too with her. We're starting out with her business around, let's focus on why you exist as a business. And let's focus on a set of very definable, very strong core values. The other thing we will help companies do is really do a lot of things around performance management, setting good performance evaluations, because we want to identify who your top talent is, what is the top 10 or 15% of your organization, and what's the bottom 10 or 15% of your organization. And it doesn't matter if you have 10 people or 10,000 people in your organization, you have both. And you have to manage both very proactively. The irony is that most business owners, where do you spend your time? With your bottom talent or your top talent?
Always on the bottom, baby.
Yeah.
Always on the bottom.
Yeah, exactly. And which ones are
And
driving?
now that those words are crossing my lips, it pisses me off that that's the way I've been too, right?
And it's and and the funniest thing is every CEO will answer it the same way, and I'm like, where do you need to be spending your time? Who are which group of talent is actually driving your company forward and driving your sales? It's your top people.
Yes.
And so we will help you manage both of those very proactively. What differentiates us? So kind of moving along, I know we're kind of on a time frame here, but what differentiates us? First of all, it's kind of funny, and I guess maybe in hindsight, when I started the company in 2013, I hate the word consultant because it has a little bit of a negative connotation. Because one of the key things we do is we are not professional consultants. I do have another senior principal I work with. We are corporate executives, and we are corporate executives who have sat on the leadership team of organizations. So we're not professional consultants who grew up in consulting. And
so you've been there, done that.
Been there, done that, and we get our hands dirty with our clients. So when we look at it, we're there quite often. A client puts us on a retainer. And so we're there not only to help you, to teach you how to do it, but we're also going to help you in learning and equipping you for you to do it. So, from a biblical adage, it's not only, we're not going to just give you a fish, we're going to teach you how to fish. We want to equip your leaders to how to fish.
I got to interject on that because in my own experience, when you hung your shingle, and I always say that I was your first client, but I know that I think somebody else wrote you a check first. So but I encouraged you for years to go out and do this. We brought you in, and we had a situation where somebody had kind of risen up in the organization to be running HR who did not have the qualifications or the skill set. Very intelligent person, but having you partner with that person really elevated them in terms of their HR. They actually ultimately got certified in HR and in SHRM, the trade association, and now is running HR for a very large company. So I love the fact that you partner with your clients to kind of bring the talent up to the level that they need. And anybody who wants to know, I am a success story when it comes to that, how HR Catalyst helped us. So in the interest of time here, one last question. When it comes, this is all about maximizing business value. That's what this podcast is for. What is the one most important thing you recommend business owners do in HR to improve their business value? What's one thing?
Yeah, the one thing is create to grow, develop, and really nurture a really, really good leadership team. So if you're going to spend any level of money within your organization on your people, one of the key things where you're going to get where you're going to really get the most ROI from anywhere within your organization is to have good leaders within your organization who are really, they're walking the talk of your culture and your core values. Because if you have a toxic leader within your organization, they will, and I know, you'll smirk and I'll smirk because I know there's a few individuals which we could have stories about after this.
Hey, I probably have dozens and dozens in my history, right?
And so, but if you have a toxic leader who is doing everything that is countercultural and perhaps even undermining the CEO or is doing things that are very inappropriate within the organization, that leader is going to create so much turmoil. They're going to drive good people to leave the organization, and they're going to take whatever positives happen is going to be whatever positives the CEO tries to do, that person's probably going to do. So it's one step forward, two steps back. If you have a person who is a poor leader, who is solidly against the culture and is doing things, everything they can to drag the culture down.
Wow. When I thought about asking that question, as I thought about how might he answer this question? That is nowhere near what I would have come up with. That is the greatest advice. Business owners should really focus on their leadership.
Yeah.
That's
And they've done that. And as organizations grow, it's fascinating because quite often an organization starts out, if you have an organization that started out obviously with just a handful of people, that leadership team a lot of times is that same handful of people, and they've just moved into more senior roles. And maybe that organization started out with 5 people, and now it's 150. What you find, unfortunately, quite often is that top leaders are the people that person grew the organization with, and some of them have no longer they don't have the core leadership capacity or the core leadership traits to really be successful in the role they're in, because it's much bigger and much more complex than it was before.
Yep. Yep. That is great advice. So, I said it was the last question, but I do have a bonus question. And
Yeah, sure.
what I like to ask our visitors on this podcast, what personality trait has gotten you into the most trouble throughout the years?
And it's kind of sad. It's kind of embarrassing for a guy who's a career HR guy to say this, but sometimes my maybe being a little bit too extroverted, and maybe saying things that were not as politically correct as they should have been. And when then somebody uses it against me and they say, Mark, but you're the HR guy, and I'll kind of reflect on what I've said. I'm like, yeah. And that was really, and a few times they have been so politically incorrect that I have to apologize to an individual who I might have offended, which I had no intent to offend, but maybe that maybe got the best of me.
Oh, that's funny. That's funny. Yes, yes, I know. I've often heard, maybe even from you, if you really want the funniest jokes that might not exactly be politically correct, go ask HR because we've
got a bunch of them.
So, how can our viewers and listeners get in touch with you, Mark?
They can get in touch through us through our website.
Okay.
So, hrcatalystconsulting.com.
hrcatalystconsulting.com. Okay.
Excuse me. And that would be the best way. We have a get in touch page there. Also, you can go ahead and search me on LinkedIn.
Okay.
So under, Mark Mitford on LinkedIn. So MITFORD.
Right.
And then the last thing would be, you could also, and also my phone number. So I always have my cell phone number on, not 24/7, but the phone number is my cell phone that I have on my business signature line. That's 214-546-3241.
Excellent. I do the same thing. I put my cell right on the card, and folks can get in touch with me. So, by the way, you should go to his website, and that is www.hrcatalystconsulting.com, because they've got a bunch of great videos that Mark has recorded about what they do and some things that you should be thinking about in terms of your business. Connect with him on LinkedIn. It's been great having you here today, Mark. What fun to talk. And so, folks, over the next few episodes, Maximize Business Value is going to talk a lot about continue to build on, of course, that long-term sustainable value in your business, even during challenging times like we happen to be in while this one is being recorded. So I hope that you will join us on the journey. Until next time, I'm Tom Bronson. Stay safe, and don't forget to maximize your business value.
Thank you for tuning in to the Maximize Business Value podcast with Tom Bronson. This podcast is brought to you by Mastery Partners, where our mission is to equip business owners to maximize business value so they can transition on their own terms. Our mission was born from the lessons we've learned from over 100 business transactions, which fuels our desire to share our experiences and wisdom so you can succeed. Learn more on how to build long-term, sustainable business value and get free value-building tools by visiting our website, www.masterypartners.com. That's mastery with a Y, masterypartners.com. Check it out.
that was perfect. I wouldn't make any changes on that.